Welcome to Father Matt's Bible Studies and Sermons videos and podcast. In today's Bible study, we study the Pentateuch, beginning with Genesis and continuing with Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. God bless you and hope you enjoy the Bible study. Let us pray.
Yes.
Yes. Almighty God, we ask your blessing again on this Bible study. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, as I was attempting to say last time, here's a map. We're starting with a map. We read some of this last week. They left Ramses and went to Succoth. So we're at the beginning of the actual Exodus. We also read, I think it was last week, that they were going from Goshen and down. So it's a little, these locations, they're trying to match the locations in the Bible, and it doesn't really match. They're in one narrative, they're coming from Goshen, and the other, they're coming from Ramses. And so that's sort of why Ramses is on this map twice, is they're trying to make it match when it doesn't actually match. Anyway, they go out, they leave where they were, and they begin to leave Egypt, and they end up first at Succoth. And again, they don't really know where that is. So this is just kind of a guess, but it's before they cross the water. Okay, so it's probably in this area. And then they make their way down. This brown thing is a road. This brown thing is a road. This brown thing is a road. I'll show you another map. See? Big roads. Right? And they don't take the road. That's the short version of this, right? They go, and we'll be reading this for a while, but they go down and get lost in this sort of circle thing, and then they come back up, and then they cross the Jordan River. And you can see on this map a little better how they do that, but this is the general area where they get lost, and this is where they cross the river. This blue thing going into the Dead Sea is the Jordan River right here. So that's how they make their way in. The maps are helpful to a degree. So you've got right here all of these things, and the question mark next to them means they don't know where they actually are. They're just guessing. Towns from thousands of years ago don't necessarily exist, and place names don't necessarily exist. So from time to time, they can identify what it is. And my geography is not good enough to know what's what. But generally on this, if it's a question mark or if it's in italics, they don't really know where it is. And so Mount Sinai and Horeb down here, they don't know where that is. They know that it's down there somewhere, but there's no identification that has stuck for where those are. I mean, you can visit a Mount Sinai now, but it's not necessarily the one that was back there and that sort of thing. So navigating exact places, easier said than done. Okay, I hope that that's something that that comes up as we go through. The other thing, just as an FYI, like note this and this, they have the same name. Do you see Red Sea and Red Sea? Mm-hmm. Right, that's a whole different problem. We're not going to get too far down into that, but if you want to deal with, where they think the Red Sea is, or the Reed Sea, R-E-E-D, like that's a whole different thing that we're not going to really cover much. You can look into that on your own, probably on Wikipedia, and just Google Red Sea, and it will pop up, and I'm sure there's a fair amount of stuff on all of that. And as we will see, when they cross the water, there's different narratives about how that goes. Any comments on the map before we move on? We're way early on this in our narrative. We're on the left side over here, just leaving. So we've got a lot left before we dig into this, but I thought it might be helpful to see it before we started. All right. Exodus. I got to stop sharing for a second because I can't see the whole screen. Here, I'm going to, because Charlotte said this was an issue. I will fix this since I now have
the sun's reflection.
Right, that's why I'm doing this. Okay. Share again. Let's jump in. Last week, we read chapters 11 and 12. I will give you a very brief overview of it, not from this. It was, and we're on 13. So 11 was the warning of the final plague. We read that. And then the first Passover was instituted. If you remember, right in the middle of the plague is suddenly instructions about how to do a cultic ritual that seems to be taking place once they have arrived into the Holy Land. And so it's probably a later thing that gets plunked in there. And it makes sense that it's plunked in there because that's exactly where you'd want to hear it. And then after that, there was another thing about another festival that gets related, which is the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And then we have the Passover itself happens after the instructions for both the Feast of the Passover, or the Festival of the Passover, and the Festival of the Unleavened Bread. Then after the instructions, it actually happens. The firstborn are struck down. That's the 10th plague. And then when that's done, they journey out and make their exodus from Ramses to Succoth. And then we get the time period that they were there for 430 years. And then there's more instructions, cultic instructions for the Passover. And that's where we ended, right in here. The Lord said to Moses, this is the ordinance for the Passover. So you get, just to be clear, Passover instructions, and then Festival of Unleavened Bread instructions, and then it happens, and then you get more instructions about the Passover. And chapter 13 will get more instructions about the Festival of Unleavened Bread. I don't believe we read this last time, but if we did, we're going to read it fairly quickly today. I think we may have read some of this, but we'll see. Charles, can you read all the way through 10? I think we may have read this last time and not the whole chapter, but we'll see.
The Lord said to Moses,
Yeah.
the Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the Israelites of human beings and animals is mine. Moses said to the people, remember this day on which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, because the Lord brought you out from there by strength of hand. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today, in the month of Abib, you are going out. When the Lord brings you out into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this observance in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a festival to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen in your possession, and no leaven shall be seen among you in all your territory. You shall tell your child on that day, it is because of what the Lord said to me when I came out of Egypt. It shall serve for you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, so that the teaching of the Lord may be on your lips. For with a strong hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. You shall keep this ordinance at its proper time from year to year.
Great. Okay, we did read that last week, so just keep going and finish the chapter so that we've got at least a background of it, okay?
When the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your ancestors, and has given it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens a womb. All the firstborn offspring of your livestock that are males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. Every firstborn male among your children you shall redeem. When in the future your child asks you, what does this mean? You shall answer, by the strength of the hand of the Lord brought us out of, by the strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from human firstborn to the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord every male that first opens a womb, but every firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall serve as a sign on your hand and as an emblem on your forehead, that by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt.
Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. That whole chunk, we did talk about this last week, but that whole chunk is another two cultic things. One is the one is the Festival of Unleavened Bread, and it's a little bit different than the one that was before. We talked a tiny bit about this. There's a couple of differences. One, it modifies it so that the festival is not just is only the major festival is the last day. In the previous one, it was the first and the last. In this one, it gives us what the month is. In this one, it also makes it pretty clear that it's going on when you get into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. And then there's a second one about, and it's as a reminder, because this is what, it's all about Egypt. And then another cultic thing about consecrating the firstborn is thrown in here. And again, it's linked to the Passover, the 10th plague itself, when everybody died. If you've been following along and care all that much, this is none of the sources that we've been looking at. This is something probably just a little bit later that was circulating in some way, shape, or form and is put into the logical place here, and links again things that were done back to the Exodus and the 10th plague. One thing, just following up on last week, because I did look it up. We talked a little bit about months last week. If you remember, there was the whole first, when is the first month? The first month in the Bible is when Passover happens. And the first month in modern Judaism today is when New Year's happens, is the Jewish New Year, is in October. That shift didn't rename the first month or that sort of thing, but it came out of the rabbis at some point, and it was related to we should start the year off with sort of a Thanksgiving for the harvest. So that's all it was. So that Rosh Hashanah is from the rabbinical tradition, not from the Bible, for what that's worth, if you were wondering about that. Okay, Charles, can you just finish off with this pillar of cloud thing? You're muted. Muted.
When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was nearer, for God thought, if the people face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the wilderness bordering the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of the land of Egypt, prepared for battle. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who he had required a solemn oath out of the Israelites, saying, God will surely come to you, and then you must carry my bones with you from here. They set out from Succoth and camped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went in front of them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people.
Great. Okay. A couple of things that are worth knowing. From here to here, sorry, is one narrative, and then it breaks right here that they're prepared for battle. And we talked a little bit about this. They don't completely agree with each other, right? If they face war, they're going to change their minds, and yet they went prepared for battle. In this narrative, the next thing that'll happen after they cross the sea is they're actually going to have a battle. Just so you know, it's a couple of chapters away, but that will happen. So this makes sense in one narrator's kind of thread, and this makes sense in another. They don't face any battle at all until they get into all the way into the land, and they fight a lot more in this narrator, for what it's worth. Second, this is our third narrator, for what that's worth, and that was the one that got us to Succoth in the first place. And if you look at our map, let's see if this one has it. Right, Ramses to Succoth to Etham. So they're moving a little bit more, and Etham is right at the water, and that's pretty much the next thing that we're going to read about, is the actual crossing of the Red Sea. And then you go back to the first narrator, this one. This picks up right here. and goes down. So the pillar of cloud is attached to if they face war, they're going to run away. Okay. Now we get to the crossing of the Red Sea. We have some context, I think. JD, can you read 14:1 to through verse 14?
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi Harithoth, between Migdal and the sea. In front of Baal Zephon, you shall camp opposite it by the sea. Pharaoh will say to the Israelites, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed toward the people, and they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 elite chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out boldly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his chariot drivers, and his army. They overtook them camped by the sea, by Pi Hahiroth, and in front of Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing that we told you in Egypt? Let us alone so that we can serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still."
Great. Okay. Going back. So it's from the narrative thing in terms of the threads. Our friend with the pillar of cloud drops out for a second and comes back at verse 5 right here. And then this section is the pillar of cloud narrator. The other part is the other narrator, for what that's worth. So the Lord says to Moses, let's go camp here. They camp here. And Pharaoh will say that they're wandering aimlessly and the wilderness is closed in on them. I'm going to harden his heart. And he'll pursue, and I'll gain glory. And then we get something slightly different, right? That they're not wandering aimlessly, that they fled. It basically matches up, but if you split the narratives apart, which you can do pretty easily, you get two versions of the same thing. Each one has a lot of chariots, each one has Pharaoh, and what have you. But a key here is the locations are only in one of the narratives and not in both. I'm not going to dwell on it. They get out there, and it is what it is. When we get to here, we're back in our pillar of cloud friend, right? And so they look back. The Egyptians are coming. They cry out to God, and why did you take us out? We're just going to die here, and we should have just stayed and stand firm. And there you go. Fairly straightforward. Any comments on it? I'm not going to dwell on it because I don't think there's a ton in there. But any comments on any of that? It stood out. Okay. All right. And the Lord will fight for you. We're going to see how the Lord will fight. Okay. Let's see. Charlotte, can you read 15 to the end of the chapter.
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. But you lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites may go into the sea on dry ground. Then I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And so I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots and his chariot drivers. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained glory for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots and his chariot drivers." The angel of God, who was going before the Israelite army, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. And so the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night.
Keep going.
One did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on the right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down on the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into a panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus, the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses.
Great. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a neat trick, and I'm going to
Okay.
share a different thing. Okay. Let's see. James, can you read? Do you see my pink and purple? I'm sorry, my pink and
Yes,
green.
I do.
Can you read just the pink?
The pink, yes. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of the Baal Zephon. You shall camp opposite it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering aimlessly in the land, and the wilderness has closed on them. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and I will pursue them, so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his armies. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going boldly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his chariot drivers and his army. They overtook them, camped by the sea, by Pi Hahiroth, in front of Baal Zephon. In the great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." but you lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites may go into the sea on dry ground. Then I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And so I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his chariot drivers. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gained glory for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his chariot drivers. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the water forming a wall for them on their right and on their left.
Great. That makes sense, right? Just the pink?
Yeah.
Is there anything it's missing?
Missing.
All right. Well, let's read the green. Therese, can you read the green? Let's see if the green makes sense on its own.
Okay. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed toward the people, and they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 elite chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die? To die in the wilderness? What have you done to us? Bring us out of Egypt. Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone so that we can serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians which you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still. Okay. The angel of God, who was going before the Israelite army, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. And so the cloud was there with the darkness, and in it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land. At the morning watch, the Lord, in the pillar of fire and cloud, looked down on the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Okay. And at dawn, the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses.
Great. Okay. I hope that's clear. You can read it as two. It's similar to the flood back in with Noah, where you had two separate versions that were intertwined. This is a little cleaner in one narrative, but you can pull it apart very easily. In the pink one, you have the divided wall, and they go in the pink one. What happens is that they go out, and there's a couple of things that are worth remembering. In the pink one, Pharaoh's heart is constantly being hardened, so he's already let them go, and then he changes his mind because the Lord has hardened his heart, which makes sense. That Pharaoh's gonna say they're wandering. I'm gonna go get them. In the green one, they've escaped, and it's not that Pharaoh let them go. For what it's worth, they escaped, so they're fleeing. In the pink one, they go. The Egyptians chase them. There's chariots and all that, and the people cry out. And the Lord says, "Don't worry about it, Moses. Lift up your hand with the staff." It's the same thing that we saw with the plagues, where in one of the plague narratives, Moses was constantly using his staff, right? And he uses the staff, and the sea divides, and you got the biblical, Charlton Heston movie where you've got the waters on either side, and they walk through, and the Egyptians try to follow, but by the time they get through, the walls fall in and they all drown. In the other version, you have the pillar of cloud that moves, and it happens right here. It moves from in front of them and goes behind them and creates a barrier between the Egyptians and the Israelites. And then the sea gets taken back. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind. And you essentially, if you envision a tidal wave or sort of a tsunami, it comes out, the sea disappears, they walk across. The Egyptians don't know that they've walked across because the pillar of cloud and fire is blocking their view and keeping them in place. And then in the morning, he clogs their chariot wheels on the shore, and they look out and see that they're gone. And then at dawn, the sea returns as like a tidal wave, and they try to flee, but they've been clogged up, and they all drown on the shore. You can divide it separately. In one, they go in, and it's walls, and they drown in the middle of the sea. In the other one, the sea comes back out like a tidal wave, and then it comes in and hits them, and they die on the shore, so they never go into the sea. I hope that makes some sense there. Again, the canonical version that we have is both combined into one, and it reads mostly fine, so it doesn't really make all that much difference, but the scholarly consensus is that it's probably divided up into two narrative threads. And I think, as you can see there, each narrative thread accomplishes the exact same thing. They die in the water, and it's the Lord's doing, but it accomplishes it in slightly different ways. All right? Now we have a song. Anybody want to... Who likes to read poetry?
Can I ask a question, though, before we go on?
Yeah, please.
So in here somewhere, which I can't remember where, there's a point where the pillar of cloud is an angel of the Lord.
Right.
And earlier, it was the Lord who was the pillars.
Right. Let's see.
So there is a little switch.
That's 19.
Right. The angel of God.
Yeah. That's, I don't know what to tell you about that, why it's suddenly the angel of God. What's interesting is there's a third narrator that we are going to get a lot coming up, and that narrator likes to talk about the angel of God. So it is possible that this is a little tiny snippet of our third narrator showing up here, but probably not with the pillar of cloud.
Okay.
So yeah, it's possible. None of these, and for what it's worth, the third narrator doesn't have any of the plagues, doesn't have any of this. Doesn't mean it didn't exist, but it's not. It doesn't show up in that narrative from what we have from that narrative, and it feels fairly incomplete as well. But yes, this is different, and it stands out right here with the angel of God, because it's the only time this shows up. And later we will see the angel of God does show up a couple of different times.
Okay.
Excuse me, Father Matt, could
Yeah.
this be confusing to the average reader if they were not in Bible study? If they're reading this, could this not be confusing because they wouldn't have anybody to clarify?
Not as confusing as the flood, right? When you read the flood in the Noah flood, and you actually try to read Genesis chapters 6 and 7, good luck, because you get lost in numbers really quickly. And what people take away from it is that the Bible is confusing to read. And that's because in some cases there's most likely multiple narratives that are kind of interwoven. In the
And see, this is the first time I'm sorry that I've heard that. You know that I mean, as we're talking in class now, we're talking about different narratives.
Now we've talked about that.
No, you did, but I'm just saying in my past readings or this type thing, I've not heard anybody say that. That's why I'm in Bible study. So
Right.
it's good to hear it and understand it. But I can imagine someone else who's reading and maybe not being directed or having things explained to them, this could be a little confusing.
But if you're not even going down that road, it's just a slightly convoluted story of an exodus. I mean, of crossing of seas. Like, you can match in your head the tidal wave aspect and the wall of water on either side, even though they don't really work. So what you get is kind of a crossing. You basically ignore the inconsistencies, and that's what most people do when they're reading these things. Is they just ignore it, they don't notice it, and they move on, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's presented as the narrative, that the canonical narrative is what it is. And when we get further in, all it does, in my view, is it helps to explain some of the inconsistencies. So it's like, oh, okay, if I read it as two different narratives, and you don't do that normally, but if you know that you can read it as two different narratives, then it makes sense of the inconsistencies. And again, the example I would use that is, I think, most helpful is we have 4 Gospels. They're just not threaded together. And because they're not threaded together, you don't notice the inconsistencies quite as much, but you would if they were threaded together. And I'll give you an example, is that the feeding of the 5,000, if you go into John and you compare it to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's a couple of differences in terms of some of the numbers of things that are left over and what have you, right? Another one is there's a healing. It's one of my favorite stories, which shows up in Luke and in Mark, and it's a healing of a guy that they drop through a roof, right? And in Mark, they pull up the roof, or they dig through the roof, and in Luke, they pull up the tiles. Again, if they were threaded together, you'd be like, they dug through the roof and pulled up the tiles. You'd be like, well, which is it? Right? But when they're in two narratives, you don't notice it. So the major difference here is that this is just threaded together, and sometimes it's threaded together in a way that it's not really noticeable. This is one of those cases where it's kind of noticeable, but everybody is so familiar with the story of the crossing of the Red Sea that any of the inconsistencies that are in here, we just gloss over. Make sense? I'll give you another example in this song of 2 different sources. Charles, can you read, I think it's going to be the whole chapter, and it's not that long. Can you read, not the whole chapter, but Exodus 15, the Song of Moses, and then the Song of Miriam that follows right after it?
Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my might, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea. His elite officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew your adversaries and sent out your fury. It consumed them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your steadfast love, you led the people whom you redeemed. You guided them by your strength, your holy abode. The peoples heard, they trembled. Pangs seized the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. Trembling seized the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away. Terror and dread fell upon them by the might of your arm. They became still as stone until your people, O Lord, passed by, until the people whom you acquired passed by. You brought them in them and planted them on the mountain of your own possession, the place, O Lord, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. When the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea.
Great. Okay. So we have two songs and an interlude. And a couple of things. One, this is identical to the beginning of the Song of Moses, except it's I sing as opposed to just sing to the Lord. And second, in what Charles read, did you notice that it went from talking about the crossing of the Red Sea or leaving the Egyptians and despoiling the Egyptians to, did you notice that we eventually started talking about Philistia and Edom and Moab and Canaan and trembling as we passed by? And then we went even further, and that you brought them in past tents and planted them on the mountain of your possession. This is Mount Zion. And you made a sanctuary. This is the temple, right? So when people talk about how the narrative is played out, this is a poem that is put in here. It's probably older than most of what we've already read, but it's a poem that is put in here that already knows there's a temple and already knows that they get into the Holy Land, and has linked this whole story to it, but it's past tense. So if you're actually thinking about Moses singing this song, it's a kind of odd song for Moses to be singing at the moment where he's saying past tense, you've already created the temple. Just throwing that one out there, right? Like that's kind of odd. Then we get this interlude, and we've basically just had the exact same thing repeated. And then that's the break, and then we get what probably was the exact same poem, but in a different tradition, it's sung by somebody else, who's Miriam, right? So the way poetry often works, and we haven't had too much of this, but the major example that we had in Genesis if you remember back to the end of it, when Jacob blesses his sons, there was a blessing that felt the same. It was all about the tribes and how they were living in the land. And it didn't really make sense in the context, other than if you were reading it much later and like knew the whole history. This is similar. If you're reading this much later, yeah, sure. The people that we eventually conquered, they were afraid of us. And we've built our temple on this mountain, and you've brought us in and planted it as our possession. But in Moses' timeline at this point, it's an odd thing for him to be singing a song that views everything all the way up to the building of the temple in the past tense. I hope that makes some sense.
I've got to say, reading it, I thought it had come to an end 2/3 of the way through. I thought that was the end of it. And then you had another page with all this stuff about what it was like when you got to Canaan.
Well, there's some people that will argue that maybe there were two different poems that were plunked together, right? But it's all the same kind of, like, when you begin to think about what the text actually says, a lot of this kind of narrative thread thing begins to make more sense when you've got a poem, and it's like, if you just take the poem and the context it's presented in, it's really weird that Moses is singing a song that talks about things that will happen way after he died and in the past tense. It's not Moses saying these are going to happen. It's Moses saying this has already happened. The other thing, everybody knows Miriam as Moses' sister, right? But it's worth noting that, and you'll have to just trust me on this, in one of the narrative threads, Miriam is Aaron's sister, and they're not related to Moses. That's a whole different thing. In another one, Miriam doesn't exist, and Aaron is Moses' brother. But again, not a huge deal. Any comments or questions on the songs? Last little thing. I talked about it, but I saw the note here, so we could probably look at it, and hopefully it's not too long. The historical context of the Red Sea might be useful. It's not that long. I'll read it if I can find it. Where did it go? All right, the Red Sea, lying between Africa, and let me look at our map first so we can see it. Right, the Gulf. Note this one has a different thing, and the Red Sea is down here, and this one, the Red Sea is here. Let's go with this one, and we'll read this. Lying between Africa and Arabia, the Red Sea is known as the place where God rescued the Israelites as they crossed the sea and evaded the Egyptian cavalry. Red Sea, however, is not an accurate translation of the Hebrew term used in Exodus 15, Yam Suf. Yam means sea, but Suf likely means reed. Reeds do not grow in salt water, so Yam Suf may have been a freshwater lagoon in the eastern Nile Delta. Other biblical texts, however, place Yam Suf at the Gulf of Aqaba, Eilat, far from Egypt and closer to Edom. The Red Sea can be traced to the name that classical Greek geographers gave to a vast sea that runs from the northern inlets of the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. Erythra Thalassa, which literally means red, that's red, sea. This name is equivalent to Yam Suf in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and reflects an attempt to locate a significant event at a known geographical point. This association became widely accepted and can be seen in the writings of Plato, the Latin Vulgate, and many English translations of the Bible. So what does that mean? It means that with all these question marks, remember I said that if it's in italics or question marks, it probably means they don't know where it is. So they don't really know exactly where this is, but the narrative makes it unlikely that you had a lagoon, that the walls came up, or a tidal wave happened, right? So the narrative and the idea of Red Sea doesn't quite match up. And now that I think about it, when did we first run into Red Sea? Did we run into it in the actual narrative or not? Does anybody remember? Let's look. Did it show up in 14? Or does it just show up in the song? All right. We'll go a little back just to make sure it's not there. Oh, there's an easier way of doing this. There we go. Bible, Gateway, Red Sea. Okay, crossing of the Red Sea, right? To be crystal clear, this is not in the Bible. This is an English heading that is thrown in here, okay? This crossing of the Red Sea title right here is not actually in the Bible. So if you go down, you discover that the Red Sea is in Exodus 10, it's in Exodus 13, and then it skips to 15. So in the actual narrative in chapter 14, Red Sea is not mentioned, and that's just worth noting. It is mentioned in the poem, and it is mentioned in some of the run-up to the locations, but not attached, right? The locust drove them into the Red Sea, and that's probably Reed Sea there, and bordering the Reed Sea. And then this poem talks about the Reed Sea. And the poem may or may not, it probably predates the narrative. So just something to keep in mind. Trying to find the exact location of everything is kind of a fool's errand. You're in this part of the world, the classic thing, if not here, near, is probably your best bet on all that. Okay, any final comments or thoughts? Okay, next week, we're going to get our first battle, I think. Maybe in 2 weeks. Next week we get water from a rock, and we'll see that, and we get manna next week. So that's and food in the wilderness. So our wilderness adventures begin, and I think that it'll be exciting. So any final thoughts on the Red Sea, that sort of thing? Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.